Let's just jump right into it and turn to our first topic here. And we want to return to the issue of Texas, which is right at the center of U.S. politics now, as there's an ongoing, roiling debate over border policy and I think everything that is underneath that. But of course, there's a lot of history and a lot of roots to all these things and a lot of future repercussions from that history and our contemporary reality. And to discuss all of that and more, we are honored to be joined here by Dr. Gerald Horne, who's a professor of history and African American studies at the University of Houston and the author, among other things, of The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. Dr. Horne, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, happy to have you here. Texas, you know, Martin Dies, one of the early heads of the House Un-American Activities Committee, George W. Bush, Abbott, Nelson Bunker Hunt, who is a big funder of the John Birch Society. I mean, it seems wherever you look, Texas is a cradle of a lot of a reactionary American history. Why do you think that is? What's behind that, Dr. Horne?
Well, first of all, Texas is so large. It's the largest state in the lower 48, surpassed only in territory by Alaska. Texas also was an independent country from 1836 to 1845. Recall that it seceded from Mexico in 1836, not least because Mexico had moved under a president of African descent, speaking of Vicente Guerrero, to abolish enslavement. The settlers, led by Sam Houston, Stephen F. Austin, and others who ostentatiously affixed their names to leading cities, weren't having that. They seceded. But alas, they could not withstand the abolitionist pressure from revolutionary Haiti and their allies in London, and they crawled into the Union by 1845. But then by 1860, 1861, Texas was objecting to the United States, not unlike the grounds on which it is objecting today. What I mean is that Texas felt the United States in 1860, 1861 could not prevent their labor force, speaking of enslaved Africans, from fleeing south of the border. Thousands upon thousands. Many of us know about following the North Star to abolition in Canada. But of course, there was a path to abolition in Mexico as well. And so, because of that, Texas was a leader in the so-called Confederate States of America, which waged war on the United States in order to ensure that Africans would be enslaved forevermore, and were defeated. However, now, fast forward to 2024, you see that Texas is objecting once again to a question of labor. That is to say, they're saying that the United States is not able to prevent labor from south of the border, particularly Mexican labor, from coming into the United States of America. And they see that as a reason for friction and conflict. And therefore, if you go to Eagle Pass, Texas, abutting the border with Mexico, you'll find not only conflicts, dangerous conflicts between the U.S. Border Patrol and armed official Texans, not to mention unofficial armed Texans, including right-wing truckers, the so-called Army of God. The state of Idaho, a red state in good standing, has sent its officials to the border as well. So it's a very inflamed situation that we must pay attention to.
Dr. Horne, I really appreciate that you're framing it around that, because when we talk about the anti-immigrant movement in the US, the far right movement in the US, I mean, the various militias that make it up, the way it grew under Donald Trump and was empowered under Donald Trump, and the fact that you've repeatedly had even US Homeland Security say over and over again that actually the biggest threat domestically in the US is in fact the armed far right, whether it's lone wolves or whatever they call them, or these more organized forces. When we see what's happening right now in Texas, how does that feed into that growing movement? I mean, you also have this happening in a presidential election year when Donald Trump, just like last time around, he seeks to gain attention and support and to rile up his base using this sort of anti-immigrant racist hate speech that's very much, I think, attached or in line with the sort of sentiment we see rising in Texas. I guess I just said a lot there, but can you just unpack what this means about the empowerment of the far right? I was surprised to see that not get the attention it deserved as this Texas standoff has played out.
Well, recall that it was just a few years ago that in El Paso, Texas, which by some estimates has the largest predominantly Mexican American majority city in the United States of America, that you had an armed right winger who came to Walmart and began shooting people down like they were dogs. He was, of course, inflamed by this idea that supposedly people from south of the border were streaming into Texas. That was a reason that led, he said, to his armed, one man armed uprising. But then again, I must focus attention on these right wing truckers who have an inglorious history. Recall that in Canada, a year or two ago, that in objection to so called COVID restrictions, they stormed into Ottawa and were seemingly bent on dislodging the Liberal Party government of Prime Minister Trudeau. And once again, you see armed truckers streaming into Eagle Pass, Texas. And for those with longer memories, you might recall what happened in 1973 in Santiago de Chile with the overthrow of Salvador Allende, the elected socialist president. One of the elements in that overthrow were once again right wing truckers. So this is a very serious situation, and it's also taking place in the context of a very important political economic development. The US press just reported the other day that Mexico has surpassed China as a major source of goods and exports. That is to say, that there is an increasing integration of the economies of the United States and Mexico, which should not be surprising for those of us who followed the trajectory of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so, as a result of that, you see laborers flocking to the border, not only from Mexico, but from Central America, in fact, from all over the world. 60 Minutes did a piece the other day talking about labor from Africa and Asia flocking to the Texas-Mexico border. And this is helping to inflame xenophobic sentiments. It's helping to inflame anti-immigrant sentiments. You might have seen the rather startling video from New York City where Curtis Lewa of the so-called Guardian Angels attacked a man on the streets of New York while being broadcast from Fox News, who he said was an undocumented worker, but actually he had just happened to be somebody from the Bronx. So for those of you who feel that because you're not an immigrant, you may be able to escape the wrath of this right wing, that incident from New York City just a day or two ago, tells you something different.
No, very, very well taken point, and that was quite the video and quite the context. And one of the other things that I think is notable about this in many ways is the way sort of this kind of border politics is used to shape a particular U.S. nationalism. And you've got a lot of the same people who are saying we need to militarize the border, saying we should be launching drone strikes into Mexico, invasions, and sort of pitting the two against each other. And it sort of feels like there's also a historical link here, too, to the emergence of Texas, this dichotomy between a more progressive government in Mexico that, most Americans don't know this now, is appealing to Americans to, join with Mexico to push a more progressive policy in Central America. And then you have this concentrated sort of cradle of reaction there, right there on the border, sort of pushing things. So I wonder just how you think this relates to how sort of the people opposed to this right-wing drive in America should be relating to this question of U.S. nationalism.
Well, obviously, this question of so-called U.S. nationalism is a clear and present danger to civil liberties and to civil rights, particularly if you look back at history. If you reel back to your introductory remarks, we know that, for example, from Texas, you had some of the most significant support of McCarthyism. Matter of fact, Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin was seen as the third senator from Texas because he was supported not only by Nelson Bunker Hunt, but also by other forces as well, who were part of the right-wing oil men cadre. And those right-wing oil men cadre are still in the driver's seat politically in Texas. Texas is a red state. It is a state where the Republican Party has been ruling for over 3 decades, continuously holding every top state office. The Attorney General, Ken Paxton, escaped impeachment despite a passel of misdeeds. You might recall that he's considered to be a close comrade of Donald J. Trump as well. And so I think that for those in your audience who are concerned about the trajectory of the United States of America and concerned about the growth of the right wing, you certainly should focus your attention on Texas, because if you look at what happened on January 6, 2021, you'll find that a disproportionate percentage of the insurrectionists actually came from Texas, even though they had further travel, say, than Virginians or Marylanders, et cetera. So this is a very dangerous state that I'm speaking about, and we need to focus on it.
So what's the answer here? I mean, I'm not. Yeah, obviously there's not enough time to really get into how we fix it, but we can at least start. And I also want to add that I know Texas is seen as this far right place, but it's also not a very democratic place. And I don't mean big D Democrat. I mean small D Democratic place. Like there's all these voter suppression laws in Texas. There's a system built in that almost guarantees you're going to have Republicans be in charge forever. So I'm just curious if you could speak to the fact that Texas is really like in the hands of the far right politically. We're not just talking about movements on the ground. We're talking about elected officials. The governor is extremely far right himself. It's a pretty frightening place politically. And I'm just curious, like, what does that mean for the country moving forward?
Oh, it bodes ill for the country moving forward. For example, just a few weeks ago in Houston, which is not considered to be a citadel of the ultra right wing, there was a pro-Nazi demonstration with swastikas and all the rest. You can go check it out in the Houston Chronicle, the daily mainstream newspaper in Houston. They had two slogans: "Make America, quote, white again," unquote, and "Down with Jewish supremacy," believe it or not. And this is typical of the state of Texas. And by the way, the right wing is pushing to place secession on the ballot, another echo of 1860, 1861. Thus far, they have been thwarted, but many of us do not expect them to be thwarted forever. You mentioned Governor Abbott. He was recently out of the country, touring the world. Now, we were told that he was touring in part to drum up investments for the state of Texas. But there are those who suspect that just like 1860, 1861, he's seeking to drum up support for secession. Now, of course, officially, he has not come out in favor of secession. But recall that Nikki Haley, the presidential hopeful on the GOP side, she made some rather curious comments a week or two ago, and fundamentally interpreted as endorsing secession. And then, of course, she had to walk it back. So this is a very parlous and dangerous situation that is dangerous not only for folks like myself who live in this benighted state, but ultimately, a la 1860, 1861, could provide a clear and present danger to others who do not live in Texas.